Hello, guys. Today I will be discussing and completing the works of Plotinus, and so this is my architecture of reality, as you can see on the left. The beyond the one there is nothing. So, what is the one? It is God. It is power. What does it create or emanate? It does intelligence. It creates intelligence. It emanates intelligence, and intelligence is being. It's thinking. It's in Greek, it's nous. And then what does the intelligence create? Creates the soul, which is the psyche, animation. And what is the soul actually? It's just life. It's plants. It's animals. It's fungi. Even bacteria and things that are animated like that, viruses. So now we're gonna start reading our essay, and you can follow along in the diagram on the left, but always remember that this is a combination of many religions, and it's not just Islam, it's not just Taoism, it's not just Stoicism or Platonism, it's everything combined. So, Beyond the One by Daniel Marcus Johnston. The One is perfect because it seeks nothing, has nothing, and needs nothing, and yet from it, everything. Why does this work exist? There is a peculiar kind of knowing that arrives not as conclusion, but as recognition, as though the mind reaching for something distant suddenly realizes it was always already there. This essay is written from that place. Plotinus of Lycopolis, the 3rd century philosopher mystic, produced the most complete account of reality ever attempted in the Western tradition. In his Enneads, compiled by his student Porphyry, he charted the emanation of all things from the One, that ineffable source beyond being, and described the soul's long return home. It was magnificent structure, and it was unfinished. Not unfinished in the way an interrupted sentence is unfinished. Unfinished in the way a cathedral is unfinished when the foundation walls and nave are complete, but the final spire, the one that catches the light, has not yet been placed. This essay places that spire. What Plotinus could not do, bound as he was by the philosophical idiom of his age, and by the inexorable limit of mortality, was demonstrate that the system closes perfectly, that the return to the One is not a retreat from life, but its consummation, that the virtues are not the ladder rungs to escape the world, but the very grammar of the soul's participation in divinity, and above all that beyond the highest point of the system there is nothing, not as absence, but as the purest form of presence. This is that demonstration. So here's the architecture. God is power. Begin with the circle, not as a symbol, but as a fact. God, the One, the Absolute, the Source, is not an entity among entities. It is not a being, however supreme. Plotinus was insistent on this point, and it remains the most radical claim in the history of philosophy. The first principle of all reality is beyond being itself. We call it power not because it exerts force that would make it dependent on something to act upon, but because it is inexhaustible ground of all possibility. Everything that exists is a motive of its overflow. It does not choose to create, it creates as the sun shines, not by decision but by nature, not by effort but by excess. God equals power, not the power over things, the power that is prior to the distinction between things at all. The circle in the diagram is drawn with a single dot at its center, and this is philosophically precise. The dot is the point of infinite density from which all radii extend. The circumference is everywhere equidistant from the source. Reality is not God plus things. Reality is God at varying degrees of self-expression. The first emanation from the one is nous. Intelligence, mind, or what the diagram renders as the equation being equals thinking. This equation is not merely borrowed from Hegel or Parmenides, though both grasped it. It is the structural truth of the second hypostasis. At the level of pure intelligence, to exist and to think are the same act. There is no knower separate from the known. The forms, beauty, truth, goodness, unity are not objects that intelligence contemplates from outside. They are what intelligence is in its act of self-contemplation. This is why the upper triangle of the diagram is filled with these qualities: beauty, bliss, freedom, goodness, light, oneness, order, peace, truth, and vitality. They are not ideals that exist somewhere above us. They are the self-knowledge of mind at its highest register. When we perceive beauty, we are momentarily participating in the self-recognition of the universe. Soul is life. The third hypostasis is soul, and here the diagram's equation is again precise. Soul equals life. Not soul as ghost, not soul as the pale thing that survives the body. Soul as the principle of life itself, of animation, of temporality, of the living movement between the eternal and the temporal. The world soul holds the entire cosmos together as living being. Individual souls are not fragments of it. They are, in Plotinus' beautiful phrase, the world soul way of knowing itself as at the particular. You are not a soul that has a life. You are life expressing itself as a soul. This is the level of which the diagram downward arrow, emanation, reaches its furthest extension into matter and multiplicity. Now, emanation and transcendence. These are the arrows that go both ways. Reality does not fall from the one, it flows. There's no evidence in emanation. There's no violence in emanation, No rupture, no fall in the Gnostic sense. The one overflows into intelligence. Intelligence overflows into soul. Soul overflows into nature and matter. Each level is less concentrated expression of the same source. This is a crucial correction to the pessimistic readings of Neoplatonism. Matter is not evil. It is simply the furthest reach of the light. The place where the candle's flame has thinned to its outermost luminosity, it is still light. It is still the one at its most dilute. The arrow of emanation in the diagram does not point downward into a pit. It points downward into the world, into embodiment, into particularity, into time. This is not a mistake. This is the universe becoming acquainted with itself at the level of concrete experience. Emanation is not exile. It is exploration. The soul descends so that it may discover, in the act of return, what it already was. Transcendence, the return. The upward arrow is transcendence, and this is the movement that Plotinus describes most beautifully and left most practically incomplete. He knew the destination. He had, by his own account, in Porphyry's testimony, experienced union with the One multiple times in his life. He called it henosis, a merging so complete that there's no longer subject experiencing an object, but the pure act of being itself. What he could not systemize was the path, not because the path doesn't exist, but because language fails at the threshold of the ineffable, and his philosophical method was brilliant as it was. Kept circling the door without walking through it into ordinary life. The completion this essay offers is this: transcendence is not a mystical exception to life. It is what happens when life is lived with maximum virtue, maximum presence, maximum receptivity to the real. It is available in every moment, not as escape from the particular, but as full inhabitation of it. So now we're going to talk about the virtues as the mechanism of return. Here's where the diagram reveals its deepest originality. The lower triangle, the soul's portion of the hourglass, is not filled with abstract qualities. It is filled with the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, courage, temperance, and justice. This is not decoration, this is the mechanism. Plotinus described the virtues as did Plato before him, but neither fully articulated what this diagram makes visually undeniable. The virtues are not the reward for having returned to the One, they are the means of return. They are the upward movement itself made practical. Wisdom is the virtue of intelligence, the capacity to see things as they actually are, without the distortion of ego, fear, or desire. In Platonic terms, it is the soul's participation in nous. To be wise is not to know many things, it is to see the one thing that makes all other things intelligible. In practice, wisdom means asking, what is actually true here beneath my preferences and prejudices? It is the first movement of transcendence, the turning of the soul's eye from appearance towards reality. Courage is the virtue of the spirited part of the soul, the capacity to move toward what is true and good even when the animal parts of our nature recoil. It is not recklessness, it is the willingness to bear the discomfort of the ascent. The ascent towards the One requires courage because it involves a kind of dying, the death of the false self, the ego that mistakes itself for the center of reality. Every genuine spiritual transformation is an act of courage. Temperance is the virtue of the appetitive soul, the ordering of desire so that it does not consume the very capacity for ascent. It is not the suppression of life, but its harmonization. A temperate soul does not reject pleasure, it simply does not mistake pleasure for the source. In perennial terms, temperance is the practical discipline that keeps the channel of the soul clear, so that the light can move through it without obstruction. Justice is the virtue of the whole, the right ordering of all parts in relation to each other and to the whole. It is not merely a social virtue, it is a cosmic one. For Plato and Plotinus alike, injustice is a kind of metaphysical disorder, a misalignment of the soul with the structure of reality. Justice in its deepest sense is the recognition that everything in its right place in the order of emanation, and that our task is not to resist that order, but to understand and participate in it consciously. The virtues are not steps on a ladder that you discard once you reach the top. They are the very substance of the ascent. They do not lead to the One. They are what the soul looks like when it is moving towards the One. Now we're going to talk about the perennial convergence. So this is about Hinduism, Sufism, Kabbalah, Buddhism, Taoism, and Stoicism. What makes this framework perennial rather than merely Platonic is that it appears in recognizable form in virtually every major wisdom tradition in history. The names change, the structure does not. In Hinduism, the same three levels appear as Brahman, the absolute, Ishvara, the Lord, corresponding to Nous, and Atman, the individual soul. The Upanishads declare Tat Tvam Asi, that thou art. The soul is not merely connected to Brahman, it is Brahman, knowing itself at the level of particularity. In Sufism, the mystic's path is described as Fana, annihilation of the self in God, followed by Baka, subsistence in God. This is Plotinus' emanation and transcendence, written in Arabic across a different sky. In Kabbalah, the Ein Sof, the infinite, the no thing, emanates through the Sephirot into manifest creation, and the mystic's task is to ascend the same tree in reverse. The diagram's diamond shape is the tree of life seen sideways. In Buddhism, the teaching of sunyata, emptiness, corresponds precisely to what is essays named as the ultimate point. Beyond the highest, there is nothing. Not nihilistic nothing, the nothing that is prior to the distinction between something and nothing. In Taoism, the Tao that can be named that is not the eternal Tao. The one that can be described is not the one. This is the same apophatic gesture that Plotinus made when he said that the One is beyond being, beyond intelligence, beyond even unity as a concept. The perennial philosophy is not the claim that all religions are the same. It is the more precise and more interesting claim that the deepest practitioners of every tradition arrived at the same coordinates, and that these coordinates can be mapped. This diagram is that map. So here's the completion. Beyond the One, there is nothing. Now we arrive at the point that Plotinus circled but never fully named. The diagram, read as a whole, is a closed system. The circle of God at the upper left, the diamond of emanation and return at the center, the arrow cycling between descent and ascent, it describes complete movement. Reality goes out and comes back. The soul descends and returns. The virtues execute the return. The qualities of nous are recovered. The circle is reached. But then what? This is the question Plotinus left open, perhaps because the answer is strictly speaking unspeakable. But we can approach it asymptomatically, the way mathematics approaches a limit it never formally touches. Beyond the highest point of the system, beyond the return to the one, beyond kenosis, beyond the union of soul with nous, with the one, there is nothing. And here we must be precise about what nothing means. It does not mean absence. It does not mean void. It does not mean the nihilistic negation of all value and being. It means the state that is prior to all distinctions, including the distinction between something and nothing. The one, as Plotinus described it, is already beyond being. But even the one, as a concept, as the term we use to anchor the system, implies a kind of positivity, a firstness, a thing that is first. When we say beyond the one there is nothing, we are not adding another level above the one. We are pointing to the fact that the one itself, in its innermost nature, is nothing, not as a privation, but as the absolute fullness that exceeds all categories. This is why the diagram closes, because when you arrive at the nothing that is the heart of the one, you realize you never left. The emanation was always already the return. The descent was always already the ascent. The distinction between God and soul, between the circle and the diamond, between the beginning and the end, these are real at the level of experience and analysis, but they are dissolved at the level of the nothing that underlies them all. The system is complete not because it describes everything, but because it describes the point at which description ends, and what remains not silence, but the luminous absence that generates all speech. So the conclusion is the test of life. Plotinus asked, in effect, what is the test of life? His answer was the ascent, the return of the soul to its source through knowledge, through virtue, and ultimately union. The completion offered here is this. The test is not passed at the moment of mystical union. It is passed and passed continuously in the quality of attention brought to the ordinary, in the wisdom that which one reads a situation, in the courage with one faces what is true, in the temperance with which one orders one's desire, in the justice with which one inhabits one's relations. The test of life is whether you live as though the diagram is true, not as an abstract belief, but as felt reality. Whether you experience yourself as soul, animated by life, participating in the qualities of nous, moving always in the cycle of emanation, transcendence anchored in the power that is God and grounded in nothing that underlines even God. If you do, even for moments you inhabit that reality fully, then the work of Plotinus is not merely continued, it is complete. So thank you for listening. This has been Daniel Marcus Johnston with The Architecture of Reality and What is Beyond the One.